This is the first in probably a set of 3 screencasts covering deconstruction, which is the School of Literary Criticism we'll be covering after structuralism. It's related to structuralism, came after it in time, and it is based on many of the same principles. But the main idea with deconstruction is it takes apart some of the fundamental assumptions of structuralism to do something different with the text. So, we begin with structuralist assumptions that language is a system of rules composed of basic units such as phonemes, graphemes, morphemes, etc. The meaning in language relies chiefly on the differences between signs, not on any innate connection between the sign and the signified. The first and main theorist that we'll cover is Jacques Derrida. It's a very, very important name in literary criticism. He taught that, like the signified can only be known through its relationships and its differences from other signifieds. That is, the signified cannot make permanent the meaning of the signifier. Thus, the relationship between the signifier and the signified is both arbitrary and conventional. For example, we have the sentence, I filled the glass with milk versus I filled the container with glass. Here we have the signifier glass, which in the first sentence refers to the container made of silicate, the raw material of the substance we know as glass, versus I filled the container with glass. Now you're talking about the substance itself. So what the signifier points to is arbitrary. It changes. But it's also conventional in that we all have to agree that it points to the same thing at the same time, or else communication does not occur. So we have the signifier cow, in this case the 3 letters, the written, the graphemes. And we know that's different from caw and from cat and bow and toe and low and no and cob and cod and cot and cave and cloud and homogeneous. Because it's different, not because there's anything in cow itself that makes it unique. It's unique just because it's not the same as anything else. So that's true of the signifier, whether it's the written sign or the spoken sign, the sound. Now, by the same token, Derrida went one step further and said that the thing it points to, the signified, represented again here by a picture, since I can't bring in an actual cow. We know what a cow is because a cow is not a horse, and it's not a pig, and it's not a cat, or a puppy, or a lion, or a giraffe, or a snake. Now, that's the same with us, too. I am me because I'm not my wife, or my son, or my pastor, or my next-door neighbor, or the little girl that lives down the street. I'm unique because I'm not the same as anything else. Not because there's anything in me that's inherently unique or special. Derrida went on to talk about logocentrism. So logo meaning word, centrism, the belief that the word is at the center. Here it's the belief that there is an ultimate reality or center of truth that can serve as the basis for our thoughts and actions. So there's something out there that centers everything. That's the rock that can't be moved, that exists in and of itself, that gives meaning to everything else when it is compared to that thing. And his name for that thing was the transcendental signified. Signified as being what is pointed to. Transcendental, it goes beyond, it transcends the system of signifiers, the signs. Thus, the transcendental signified is an external point of reference on which one may build a concept or a philosophy. And in Christianity, probably the best example, the clearest example, the transcendental signified then is God himself. He is external to the system, the world as we know it, and it is the reference on which we build our system of beliefs. The transcendental signified then provides ultimate meaning, because it provides an end to the ongoing reference from sign to sign. A cow is not a horse, it's not a cat, it's not a dog, it's not a snake. This just keeps going on and on and on. When you get to God, we don't say God is God because he's not Satan. No, we say God is God because of who he is. And it's his character that defines who the rest of the world, defines us. We are made in his image. So if God is a creator, that means that we are creative beings. We can create as well. If God is a moral being, we are also moral beings. Everything points back to God, but God exists independently of everything else. So one of my classes illustrated it this way. They felt that they were all the signifiers, and I was the transcendental signified, because I was the one that brought meaning to the class. Everything in the class pointed back to me. It was kind of fun. Derrida based a lot of his arguments on Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction, which is the idea that a thing cannot both have a property and not have a property. Something can't be both dark and light, good and evil. And this is an important part of the binary oppositions, how binary oppositions give meaning to life. And it's produced this either-or mentality in Western thought. Western philosophy, therefore, according to Derrida, is based on a series of these binary oppositions. And in each opposition, one term is privileged over the other. We looked at this as one form of structuralism. But Derrida said that these terms actually exist in a state he called supplementation. That is the unstable relationship between elements in any binary opposition. And by unstable, we mean that no term in any opposition is pure, existing solely within itself. Every term in every opposition relies in part on its opposite. Would we know, for example, what darkness is if there was no light? On the other hand, would we know what light is if there was no darkness? No, we need both terms to help define the other. Now, it gets a little stickier when we get into moral situations. So the statement, every lie has some element of truth in it. That's fairly easy for us to accept because we know that the best lie is the one that's 99% truth. It's just that 1% that isn't true. It's hard to ferret it out. But if you take it and go the other direction, to say that every truth has an element of a lie in it, now it gets a little bit stickier. And yet, if you think about it, this also is true. If I say to my wife, for example, I love you, does that mean I am always totally committed to her best interests? I never think of myself? So the very statement, I love you, is a bit of a lie, because I don't always love her, unfortunately, much as I try. I'm human. So the consequences then from metaphysics. All human knowledge becomes referential. Just like signs are referential. They point somewhere else. That is, we can only know something because it differs from something else. We know what a cow is because it's different from the horse, from the cat, the dog, etc. This is true of everything. We only know something because it differs from something else, not because we can relate it to a fixed, unchanging truth. Therefore, nothing can be studied in isolation, and all knowledge is therefore context related. Now this poses problem for traditional Christianity, among other systems. Traditional Christianity, theism, traces the basis for morals back to God, back to the transcendental signified. So, for example, it is wrong for man to lie because God always tells the truth. My behavior is judged in relationship to God's character, which is unchanging. It's wrong for me to steal because God never takes anything that's not his own. I should love my neighbor because God first loved me. But if what Derrida says is true about knowledge, and again, Derrida did not believe in God, He rejects the idea of a transcendental signified altogether. There is no such thing as a transcendental signified. Once you get rid of the supernatural, the spiritual, all you're left was the material world. And if all there is the material world, then nothing can transcend it. And you cannot have a transcendental signified. Thus, knowledge itself becomes referential. Just like language, we know cow from cat by the difference in the sounds. We know a cow from a cat by the difference in the animals. So we know a truth from a lie only because it's different from everything else. So you have to look at the overall context. And that means that nothing can be studied in isolation, which makes morals then situational, context related. That means then we have to learn to live without closure. Will I ever know exactly what a cow is? Well, no, because I'll never experience every single other thing that's out there. Will I ever know exactly who another person is or myself? Well, no, because I'm never going to know every other person that's ever lived. You have to live without that final closure. Therefore, all interpretations of life, self-identity, knowledge are possible, probable, and legitimate. Consequences of this for literary criticism is the importance of intertextuality. That is, all texts must be studied within their interrelatedness with all other texts. We looked last Monday at a number of different Shakespeare plays to talk about soliloquies and how you could guard a soliloquy from one character if you were aware of it, and then how that changed over time into soliloquies being interior monologues. And it got its meaning by comparing one text with another text. Here, Derrida says it's not just Shakespeare's plays or plays themselves, but all texts. And by all texts, he meant nonfiction, fiction. You have to compare a cookbook to Hamlet if you really want to understand Hamlet. All texts. Gets a little messy. These texts are caught in a dynamic, context-related interchange. And you have to take into account how the texts interacted with each other. Now, this can be really profitable, but like I said, it can get a bit messy. Aporia, then, is the belief that there is no definitive or correct interpretation of a text. And now you're back to everyone's answer is right. There is no one correct interpretation of the text. And this flies in the face of new criticism, for example, which taught that there was one correct interpretation, and you found that by studying the text. Deconstruction leaves the text in aporia. And here we're referring to the paradoxes, the contradictions, the puzzling statements in a text that cannot be resolved. Is My Papa's Waltz a poem about a young boy who experiences the abuse of an alcoholic father? Yes. Is it a text about a boy enjoying a moment of fun, romping around the kitchen with his dad while his disapproving mother looks on? Yes. Both at the same time. There's no definitive, no correct interpretation. Just all these possible, probable, and acceptable interpretations. Key term, and this is a pun in French. And getting to the end of my limit on time here, so I'm going to pause. We'll pick this up in part 2.